Welcome to the Data Platform Summit 2020. My name is Thomas Leblanc. We're going to look at building an agile data warehouse, and we're going to mainly focus on Data Vault data warehousing. Again, my name is Thomas LeBlanc. I'm a SQL Server architect, Microsoft MVP for the past 3 years. I help with product management for a data warehouse automation tool from a company called Warescape. You might want to label me as a database normalization nut. If you didn't have your database in fourth or fifth normal form, you kind of got the wrath of Thomas on you once I learned that developers weren't going to listen to me and design their own database, especially when NoSQL and JSON structures came in. I kind of retired as a developer and went into the data warehouse world. Got a little crazy about dimensional modelings, and today I do more of Data Vault than I do actually of dimensional modeling, even though we overlay dimensional modeling on top of the Data Vault. You can reach me on Twitter, Gmail, blog, SmilingDBA. I volunteer in the community, Microsoft Data community, as a virtual chapter chair. I did 2 years at Data Architect as well as Excel Business Intelligence. Been on a nomination committee for the past board of directors. I also help with our local SQL Server user group as well as the local analytics user group, and was the chair of the last BI edition of SQL Saturday in Baton Rouge, which was about the first or second weekend in March before everything pretty much shut down because of COVID. So what are we going to talk about today? The agenda is what is Agile as it relates to data warehousing. We're going to look at an understanding of that. We're going to look at a data vault and why it's designed for agility. And we're going to look at this incremental approach by doing sprints. So Agile, data warehouse, data warehousing. What is Agile? Well, it's whatever you want to call a dev cycle. So you're pretty much looking to what it boils down to is these smaller development cycles. It's a smaller unit of work. And the reason for that is so you can estimate the next time the sprint comes. So as you estimate work, your range of correctness in estimating gets smaller and smaller. Your result-driven goals. So the goal is not necessarily get this to the client. It's here's the goal of the sprint, and it might just be the design of the database or the requirements gathering. It's whatever that smaller unit is for you. And this becomes measurable blocks of work. So your sprints could be 2 to X weeks. I was in a company that did 5-week sprints, and that was okay. We got a lot done. What we need to learn is how to stagger things. So, in the data warehouse world, you've got to do your requirements gathering before you can design a logical database. You need your logical database before your physical database. You need that before someone can write the ETL. You need that before someone can design an analysis services database or a Power BI structure. The relationships, the measures, the hierarchies you have to create. And you need all that before you can produce a report. So, staggering it might help. And these measurable blocks are just each point along the way. But you want to make sure something's finished before the next person can start. So those data warehouse methodologies in the world today, I'm cranked out with this full data warehouse. You design and implement everything. You look at the full area. And with the modern data warehouse today, and where data is coming in from all different areas, that seems to be way ahead of its time. Dimensional modeling popped up, and it's really not a data warehouse. You create these data marts, which have facts and dimensions, and then eventually you have conformed dimension, whereas the data marts can become hubs and a spoke. This hubs and spokes of data marts that become a larger data warehouse. And along came Data Vault. I'm not rating any of these above each other, but they rely on hubs, links, and satellites rather than dimensions and fact tables. And it's fully auditable and adaptable, and that's its key. Is as you're designing it, you could just add things onto it, especially new systems or various systems or the relationships between quote hubs or dimensions. And all these are great data warehouse methods. I think that more agile one is the data mart. So if you were to pick the best for your team, and if you have time, I would plan a data vault. And you can see on the right, the reds are the links, which have relationships between two hubs or one hub. And each one of those yellows is a satellite. So that's your detailed information or informations for each hub and each satellite. So let's look at a simple automation of the product and category. And just from this, you can get an idea of how you could build these hubs, links, and satellites for almost any sort of data warehouse that you're building. So here is our, we're in a database called Northwind, and we have a connection to the source, which displays the structure of these tables. So this is our category table. Shows us the schema and database, the different columns that we have inside of the database, along with their data types. A normal, just kind of an entity relationship type diagram or data diagram. Well, our product has a category ID. It also has a supplier ID. So it has two relationships. And what we want to do is we want to build something from this little area right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a logical type model with this. So I'm going to go ahead and work off my displayed view here, and I'm going to create one of these logical models, and I'll call it NW Sprint 1. So in my Sprint 1, I've got some definitions of what I call satellites, or really their attribute types that could create a satellite, and I'm creating a logical representation of my hub. So my hub name is product, and my key is product ID. Now, inside of Data Vault, you might look for more of a unique name rather than an ID, because the ID can change, especially if you have different systems that come together. So the ID generated in one system might not be the same as the other. So instead of ID, you might want to reference name instead. And now we'll add also for a relationship with the product hub is our category hub. So we have a product and category, and we're going to put a link between those two, and we'll call it product category, and it's going to be those two hubs. So we're creating actually 3 tables in this relationship, and it's going to ask us what that attribute name maps to our source. So category name and then product name. So now we have the two systems, 2 areas. We're bringing them together. And inside of Data Vault, there might be a link dependency child. We'll talk about this more when we get into more of a transactional style. These are all lookup tables, so we don't have anything currently that would cause that. Now, for our category, we're going to remove the picture. We don't want that in there. And then on our product, we're going to remove some of the numeric types. We're going to keep the IDs for relationships and some general things about quantity per unit price. But on our link, we're going to add that discontinued, reorder level, units on order, and units in stock. So we have 2 hubs, and then we have a link between the 2 hubs. So now I'm using some metadata stored for these items to generate some tables. It's really logical right now, but what I'm really looking at here now is more of the satellite information for those. We're going to close, click next, and then we have a final review of how we want to handle the data. So for instance, inside, and we'll talk more about this, you might have things that have different volatilities. For instance, the volatility of our product, supplier, and category might not change that often, but quantity per unit and unit price might change a little more often. So what this is it gives us the ability on our hub of product to have a satellite of columns that don't change frequently separated from the ones that do change frequently. And this is really the part of the Agile system. So here in my category hub, I'm going to go look at my attributes. So now I've got attribute types. Category name is my business key. The ID is a medium satellite. My description is a medium. I might not even want category ID inside of here. I'm going to keep it just for the reference, or I might even rename it instead of it being category ID. Maybe it's the particular system, Northwind category ID. But here, I'm trying to keep it as granular as possible. The link between them, instead of being a business key, is a link business key. And then our additional attributes for that are called satellite transactions. So now we have a different type of satellite table that can be created. The product looks pretty much the same as a category, except these three have one satellite volatility, where the other two are a little more volatile, meaning they change more frequency. So I have a logical model here that was based off my physical model. We didn't do the suppliers. We're going to show how we can Agile add this in a little while. But this is my sprint one, and I now want to actually generate a data vault from it. So I'm going to call this NW sprint one. Might misspell some of that, but that's okay. Y'all get the idea. I'm just creating these models along with a sprint number so I know where I'm at. It's going to ask me for some to generate some of this code or generate some of the design of it. And what I get here is a nice data vault designed with the hub for satellite, H underscore category. I have a link product category. That's the relationship between H category and H product. I have one satellite on my hub, and then I have some additional satellites for my product and also for my transaction. And you also notice here we have two different ones for product. One's a low LROC and one's an ILM for medium volatility. So what we've done is we've created a design logically that now can actually be deployed. I'm sorry, this is actually the physical design of the table that can be deployed. Now, one thing also you'll notice is that it added some additional fields. DS record source, load date, and create time. So all of our tables have flags on them that can be logged for when things change. Even inside of the satellite, we have a hash of the change of the two attributes in the satellite. You'll also notice the attributes are in the satellite, and the only one that's in the category is that business key. And the key now of the table is going to be a hash of that category name. So that's a good section of our first sprint, which now can be deployed and populated based on the metadata that's been stored with these items. All right, so let's look at some Agile changes, mainly around keys. We saw that in this last demonstration, our first sprint with product and category. You know, there's no other relationships needed. There is a supplier ID on the product ID on the product, which we can actually use later. There'll be a new link and a new hub. But of course, we didn't see anything with the order line in this case, but it does need products. And all it would be is a simple link that would be created between the hubs. So we get a new order line hub or order hub. And then we'd create a link between product hub and the order hub, and it would have that particular relationship. So in our data vault, a hub needs what's called a business key. We saw that with the ID as we stepped through it, and it's used to hash for the primary key of the hub. And this is able to be used in the links as well. So for creating a hub, you need at least a business key for that. Now there's more to it than that. If we continue on the slides, we'll see the link, which was between, in our case, that product and category, and it needs what's called a link business key or business keys, depending on if you have one or more hubs assigned to it. And this relationship can be between two or more hubs, but the main purpose of a link is to put a relationship between two hubs, or it could be a transaction link, or even a link what's called an as of, to make two different hubs that might have the same thing, like product, in two different systems have some sort of way to relate. This is 001 product from here, and it's ABC in this one, and we're creating a link to show the relationship between those. Those are the same product. They come from two different systems with two different, quote, business keys. The satellite is the additional information. So the hub or the link only has the keys. The primary key of that satellite is going to be either the hub hash key or the link hash key, and it's the details of the hub and the link. And you can have multiple tables, meaning that there isn't just one satellite for a hub or link. You could have actually multiples. So if we look at the attribute types for the hub, we see that business key. This key is product ID, and it's a unique business identifier. For simplicity purposes, we're using the product ID. But if you really want to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, you're looking at inserts only into this table. It could be multiple columns. The thing is a hash key is created with it. So you can kind of reverse engineer the hash into the business key if you need it. We have another column in there called product name, and if that's unique within the system, you might want to use product name instead of product ID. Why hash? Because we can reverse engineer it. We could add the hash in there, and instead of using a surrogate key, which really has no meaning, the hash actually does have a meaning. So more about attribute types. We need satellites. So those product name, some of the IDs might have some sort of medium volatility. That could be a satellite. We have, you create one satellite per type. So it's not necessarily the volatility, but what you're looking for is just being able to insert data inside of there. It could be based on the frequency of change. In this case, quantity per unit and unit price change more often, so we're going to put that in a separate satellite. That way, you're building the, quote, slowly changing into your satellites. You don't need to try to do some sort of business logic in it. It's to just separate the new data into different systems. If you get into a new system and it's feeding additional data, then you can create a separate satellite for it. If your key's still the same, but you have additional data, or maybe the columns have changed. Maybe one column has become multiple columns, or multiple columns has become one column. Rather than trying to put the soft business rules into your ETL, you just feed it into a different satellite table, and you let your views later on query that data. The link in our example was that product category. We have these items that change. Again, we're looking for inserts only, so our links and hubs really have very few data put into it except inserts. We're looking at only that the items that change will go into our satellites, and things like unit in stock or on order or supplier, even discontinued, are going to be sit into a satellite for that particular link. We're only looking at the keys inside of the link table, and our satellite has that data that changes. So our hash key in this case is that product ID. It still has a business key, but again, we're looking for those inserts only, and the hash key doesn't necessarily have to be, quote, a surrogate key. You can always recreate it from the business key or reverse engineer it. And it's really good for debugging problems with the inserts. And also, if you think about it, you have really consistent code. That hash key, not only is it in the link, but it's in the hubs. Your generation of it is the same. And by creating this pattern rather than a surrogate key, a hash key, you're looking at consistent code that's in any hubs, any links, and any satellites. So let's look at a demonstration more about keys in our business link, and we might even see something about link dependent key. So back in SQL Server Management Studio, we're going to look at some of these queries. So just to give you a heads up right now, there's three areas that we're looking at here. One is the load area. So when we're bringing data in, we're loading it. Now this is an example of this this particular data vault. Your load doesn't necessarily have to be a quote staging area. it's basically the source data, which in this case is the category ID and category name, with the addition to a column of where the source is, Northwind, and a load date. These two columns in themselves can be hard-coded in a view, or if you CDC or replicate data, then you can create views on top of that to feed your data vault. The important one is the staging area, and all data vaults should have a staging area. And you could have that record source and load date in the staging area if you want. And actually, I believe the 2.0 says that that is where you should have it. In addition, there's a creation time. So the creation time is right now because that's when we're loading this particular data. Also, when you're going from the source, and in this case, load, to the stage, you're also calculating the hub hash key, which is the hash or whatever the business key, whether it be category ID or category name. And then you're also doing a hash to see if something has changed. So in our case, the business key is category ID, the data or attribute is category name, so our hash for the change is on category name. So that's our load and our stage, which prepares the data for the straight insert, which is going to go into our hub category and then also our satellite category. So we get this data, and it seems excessive mainly because category only has two columns, really the ID and the name, but you can see how beneficial this is if it's a set of larger amounts of data. So let's look at what we're doing here. So in order to insert into that hub, I'm going to go grab stuff from stage. I'm also doing a distinct on those stages. I commented out the date just because there's a declare variable there, but we could put the current date in there if we'd like. But basically it's going in and it's saying, let me go find all the existing categories. Let me go find the existing categories and then join it where I'm actually doing a where not exist, where the stage is not equal to the hub. So for instance, you don't need to stage all data all the time. You can only you can produce it where it's only staging what's new or what's been updated. It's up to you at that level of ETL where you're going. But what we're producing here is an insert. I can do my select distinct here now, and I'm not going to get anything because everything exists in the database. Same thing for the link. The same exact items, except in the link, what we're actually joining on is the combination of the two hashes. So our link, if you remember, let's go and just do a select star from it. db.l. It's got the hash of the product and the category, and its primary key is the hash of those two combined. It's not this plus that. It's actually the two business keys to produce that particular value. But we're still doing the search on the hub hash keys, which are part of the combination. Could be your primary key if you didn't pick a hash for the actual link row. But it's basically the same thing. I mean, we're doing a distinct, and we're saying where it doesn't exist, and in our case, it doesn't exist anywhere. The satellite is a little more complicated, mainly because you have one area here that's looking at a version. So in the hub and the link, we're doing straight inserts, right? So you're saying, okay, I'm doing straight inserts, but how do I know it ends if I don't have a end date? Well, your start date from the previous row will tell you that. So here's a query on my satellite category MROC, and I'm doing a lead on that load date, which really that should have been the start date, over partition by the hub hash key, which is part of the key. In a satellite, your key is actually a combination of the hub hash key and the date. I'm ordering it by that start date and calling that my end date. So what I get is a null for all end dates that don't have a next version of the particular row. So if you remember from the previous demo, we changed grain/cereals to grain, and then we added the cereals row. So you'll notice here we do have some and a miscellaneous. So we added the grain, we added the miscellaneous, and we split the cereal at this point. We still have in our existing grain cereal. You'll notice too that the hashes are the same because it's by the category ID. So we modified the name of a particular category ID. The newer one has a version 2, and because of that lead function, I can grab the date, consider it my end date because it's the start of the next version. So don't feel that you just because you're inserting a start date and no end date, you can't just do inserts only. Some people might say, well, I want to use an update and update the date. And if you want to, that's fine, your discretion, but you don't have to. You can T-SQL Windows functions all this particular data for you. So we're grabbing that version number. We're looking at that stage table, select distinct from the stage, but now we're doing a left outer join on a grouping of that satellite. So we're looking at that hub, that start date, and that DS version. And this is all our satellite information. And it's all on that particular first row that we inserted. Now we're doing a left join on this because if there's anything in the stage that's not already exists, we want to insert it. But what we're also looking to do is to insert anything that has a hash key difference. So here we have a where not exist, where everything pretty much matches up. So if none of these match up, start date, hash, or the hub hash, so I'm talking about two hashes, the hub link hash as well as the change hash. So all those are equals here because we're doing a not exist, and that'll bring us all new rows. Now if I run this just to select, I'm probably not going to get any data inside of here. Correct. So let's do this. Let's switch it over to our design area, and let's go into our category, and we're going to say let's insert a new source. So we have a new source in here. It's called East Wind, not North Wind, and we're going to grab the categories to make it part of a system that has two sources. Now I did that wrong in the design. Let me start all over. What I want to do is I actually want to add a new one called East Wind here, and then I'm going to add my source mappings and then grab that category again. So now I have two different sources that the data comes from, and they're from the same structure, they're just different databases. So as I flow this through the process, so I've just added something. Really what I should have done was made a copy of this first. I should have quick copied this to Sprint 2. And for speed, I'm just going to go ahead and generate my vaults from here again. I must call it Sprint 2. And it's going to take that new source, add it to my existing one. You know, I'm just adding a new source. I'm going to take that one, create my load and stage from it. Again, this is my Sprint 2. And now really all I'm doing is adding a new source to category. So the first one, I was bringing everything in from just the North Wind. Now I'm bringing something in from an East Wind database. And what I'll notice is before I had a stage for stage category North Wind, which brought it from that default source. And now I have one from East Wind, and I got it from a source. So now my staging has an East and a North Wind. And then my load tables, I'll have load category North Wind, and down here I have load category East Wind. And then my hub for category, my hub here from category, still has two different source mappings, but now it's pointing to the load rather than the source. And my satellites have been split into two. So here's my satellite for category name from North Wind and category name from East Wind. Now, this is a very simplistic example, but it gets the whole thing to the stage that we really want it. So I'm doing my sales sprint 2. I'm bringing it all the way over to my SQL Server database. Here I can tell it where to place items, which a lot of this stage is going to be brand new, but I like to put them in their own schemas. So I've created schemas for stage, load, and DV is the actual data vault. And I can actually call it my sprint 2. If I wanted to back one out, then I know which sprint to do that to. I'm going to remove one mapping here and send it on its way. So now I've created a whole new and designed another sprint. I'm going to actually push it into my automation area, which is going to generate new code for that particular new staging. So here we can see there's some new items in here. This east-wind connection with the staging has been split up, as well as the satellites now. So we have 2 satellites, but there's no reason we can't combine that data together into a sales, because all we have is one hub. So the hub has the column for the record source indicator, whereas the 2 satellites are pointing to two different areas. So it shows 2 examples. One is, first, you can do multiple source mappings in a data vault, and the second is that you can actually separate the satellite information, because you might have a new source system that has a completely different area. So let's go to our sprint 2, and we're going to load our categories. And you'll notice here we have load for east wind, and we have load for north wind. We have our staging for east wind, and we have our staging for north wind. Now if I go to my hub and I right click and I load my hub category has no new records. So there's nothing new inside of that east wind that would have added either one. And I can actually execute each one individually and see if any of those categories come in there. And in this case, none of them do. So I can go add that and see what happens. So let's go over here to east wind. And let's go to tables and categories. And let's edit this. And let's say east food. So I've added a category to my east wind food. And if I go to that load categories, east wind, I have 11 rows instead of 10. I'm going to go ahead and stage that. 11 rows. And now I'm going to load my hub. And I should have seen at least one row in there, and I don't for some reason. Oh, there it is. One new record, and then the other one should have 0 records. And I'm going to go to my link, which doesn't have any updates because there's not a product associated with that new category yet. But I'm going to go ahead and load that east wind, the east wind satellite. And if I go do the north wind, here you can see 11 records. But if I go do the north wind, I notice that I only have 10 records inside of there. So if we go down, we have a new satellite that has that particular data in it. And what I can do here is say select star from, and it's not going to come in because I need to refresh my local cache, dv.satellite, and now I have that south wind or east wind, and here I can see that veggies was one of them that was new, but the one I added was east food. So now instead of having one satellite on our category, we now have 2. That particular one is still out there, but what we've done here is actually added one called north wind. And now we have a north wind and an east wind. So this shows you how you can get 2 different source systems and then combine that data together. The hub is the same. So I mean, if we go to that hub, so if I go to the hub, I have an 11 down here. You can see my source is east wind. So for instance, if I go try to, let's just create a new query window here. Use pass, go, and if I say select from DVH category, and I do an inner join to my DV dot east wind, and I'll say SE on SE dot, I need to get that hub hash key as well as the C dot hash key, and I'll put a star on there, and I get 11 rows. But if I try to do it also with the north wind, any, I do both of those, I only get 11. So in this case, I do have to use left joins just to make sure I get all my data. And now I've got that east wind, and I can combine these together. They're two different source systems, but yet I can use the same generated code to view it. So that's a good look at what we want here as a load, which has our source and our date. Then we have a stage, which includes the creation date, and a hash change. So if something changes, it sees it compares the hash rather than column to column. And then we can see the different hubs, satellites, and links that it produces with some code that looks at kind of how do I go from stage to my hub, how do I go from the stage to my link, and then eventually how do I populate my satellite, which gets a little more complicated, and mainly because of our change hash here. We're looking at the change hash and not just at the column by column. So let's look at a little more information about links. So in links, you have an attribute type called link business key. We're talking about these attribute types because this is the metadata you want to associate it with it. So whatever your source is, you want to get that business key related to either a business key for a hub or link business key for your link. Now this is the link table, and what it really does is has a combination of hub business keys. This is how you relate one hub to the other, and there can also be a point where you have a link dependency child. This is an additional column with the business keys that make the row in the link unique. Usually you'll see this like an order line number, which is more of a transactional type value, but it's not necessarily related to a hub. You don't want a hub of each order line number. You want to use that as what's called your link business key. There's additional columns that get added to link, like the dates it's loaded, the date it's created, the source system, and etc. And we'll talk about these a little bit more. So these additional columns are for tracing. So this is where you get your auditability and your archiving all in one place. There's varieties when the different types of entities, but your main ones you'll see is a create date, a start date, and a system name. And what you don't see here is an end date, because you can use your lag lead functions, your Windows functions, to get those. And what you're looking for is for these hub, links, and satellites to be inserts only. So when we get to our satellite for a link, we're looking for changing attributes. So what attributes inside of a link are changing? This value that you're looking at could change, meaning you could have a different satellite for it. And the satellites also could be by area. So you might have a combination of the area and the volatility of the changes. Your change rate or the different types of dates. Sometimes your dates don't change as often as the other columns, or a situation where you have GDPR data or the regulation, PII, whatever it may be, you might create a separate satellite for that information. That way the security can be put on the satellite rather than on the hub or the link. Now let's look at a demonstration of using these keys and these attribute types with a link, the link dependent, as well as our satellites. All right, so let's say we're going to do another sprint. We're going to do sprint 4 or 3 in this case. I'm going to go to sales. I'm going to actually I'm going to go to the north wind to the 1.0 version, which is really our sprint 1, and I'm going to create a new design. I'm going to go back to my sales and I'm going to call it sprint 3. So my sprint 3, I'm going to keep the types, but here I'm going to add a order, which is order ID. I'm going to create an employee, which is going to be an employee ID. And then we're going to create a customer with a customer ID. And let's keep that for now. We're going to say next, and we're going to create a link. And this is going to be our customer employee, or actually, let's call it order customer employee. And this will be our order customer employee. We'll click next. We got our link. Now we're going to tell it what our business keys are from each hub that we created. And we're actually bringing orders in here now. And now it's going to ask us for those link dependency child. So I know from my data that order date might need to be included with the orders in order to make it unique. So a customer and an employee plus that order date would make that particular row unique. And my customers, I'm just going to take off some of the data so we're not reading in everything into here. Employee, the same thing. I don't want to put the birth date, even though I could put the birth date, make it a GDPR satellite and throw it off to another area. I know I added that order date as a link dependency child, so you see those two have been removed from there. My shipping information is okay, but the two dates and the freight need to go into my link table. So here I'm going to add that from my orders, freight, ship, and required date, and click next. So now I've created a new area for my logical design. You could see the links in the middle. I've got my 3 hubs and with a multiple key link table this time. So you're not just locked in to doing one-to-one as hubs. So go to sales. I'm going to do it my sprint 3. Create. It's going to take what I designed and it's going to bring it off into a new logical model. And so now I've got 2 different sprints. Here's my first sprint. Let's go back to, well, we'll look at sprint 2. So sprint 2 is one we updated. So here I've got category, product, and link product category. But in my other diagram, I've got order, employee, customer, and order, each with its own satellites. They all have their own satellites. But if you notice, there is no relationship between those two. So I can actually go in here and try to merge these together, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the same sort of loading that we did in the past. I'm going to do my sprint 3. And I'm going to generate the load and staging for it. And I'm actually going to port that into my automation tool that'll generate the code and populate this particular data. So all this is being generated by the metadata kept for these. And basically the metadata is that area that says, oh, look, this is a link hash key. These are hub hash keys. That's my business keys. And then these are my different hard rules that are in the hubs, satellites, and links. So I have a set of columns that help for the tracing and auditability, but basically each one of these, even the table now, has a particular table type, which is now metadata about it. So in the background, I'm building this metadata where this existing script engine can go look at the metadata, and because it's pattern-based of Data Vault, it could generate this. Same thing could be done for dimension effects, but it gets a little more complicated with like slowly changing and when you want to generate like this link dependency child. There's some automation you could do from it, but it's a little more limited in the space for that. So now let's go ahead and just see if we can't get this whole thing deployed. And I'm basically creating a system from all that metadata to tell it where to go. Again, I'm setting my areas from DV to stage and to load. And if I want, the automation could do this for me. It can go look at the first couple characters, or I could look at the metadata of the entity type and figure out which particular target it wants to go to. And now I'm tracking it by sprint, and I could tell what was added with each sprint. Need to remove one little checkbox here. Go next, next. The good thing about the nexus in this case of this automation tool is that it means that everything was successful and I didn't get an error, which is nice. I'm gonna go to that sprint 3, send it to my automation tool. It's going to run, it's going to look at all that metadata. And in this case, everything is new. So we should see news created, and then we should see all the tables created, all the indexes created. All of this is pattern-based because of data vaulting, the fully automation. And then it generates the code for, it knows what load is. Load is a one-to-one with the source system, other than the column for the source and the column for that load time. The stage needs to calculate those hashes, so it's got to generate the SQL to create those. And then the hubs, satellites, and links has that special code because you're doing inserts only to test to make sure first that it's not a new row in the stage, and second that it doesn't match an existing row and need to be inserted because the change hash has changed, which means the change hash has the columns that are being read into the satellite, and there's a hash created for them. So I'm going to go refresh my display here. And I'm going to go to my load, and I've got a bunch of new loads. Now, because I've done my sprint, now I only see the things that are related to that particular sprint, which is nice because then I can customize or automate all this stuff. I'm running them manually, just going to want to make sure nothing bombs, and if it bombs, I want to stop right there, but I'm going to go ahead and populate all these because I'm overly confident that it's all going to work, especially in this case. And I'm updating all my hubs, all my links, and all my satellites. And now I've got this nice new set of spokes, in this case for order, customer, employee, that I didn't have with the previous one. So the previous one was product and categories with the link. We did some satellites and a multi-source. And then this one is a whole separate one in a separate sprint. So you can imagine developer A is doing product and categories. Developer B is doing order, customer, employee. And they're doing two separate development paths into the same system with the same automation tool, just working in two different parallels. You need to put it together with that order lines between order and product. We haven't got to that point yet, but now you see that we've gotten all this data inside of there, and I'll create a new query here. I'm going to call it 21 cust employee order, and I'll go to that database. What I'll need to do is refresh the IntelliSense, and I can say select star, and I'll just do it straight line dv dot well, didn't want that. H customer select star from dv.h employee, which really this is my sales person. So we're sticking with employee as the name because it fits the source system. We're looking at hard rules, and we're making sure that our raw vault has all the existing stuff in it as it came from the source system. But when we go display this to the business intelligence developer, we're going to want to change those names for them. So we'll do a select star from dv.orders, and we also have a select star from, what do y'all think this is going to be? I wish I had some user interaction here, right? The link. So there's my customers, there's my customers, my employees, my orders, and then my order line, and you can see the 3 customs. Now the hash here, it looks blank, but it really isn't. It's just not displaying good in SQL Server Management Studio. But now I've got my hubs for all those orders, my link dependency child, which is the order date, my record source, load date, and creation time. And then of course I've got the other tables, which are my satellites. So the satellite customer, employee, and that transaction. So in this case, we got a required date, a ship via, and a freight. So that's one of our satellites. There should be another. Oh no, we removed all the ship, which we should have created another one for that, but we excluded that. We'll do that later on and add it in addition. So we'll do another sprint and add it. Oh, here it is. No, the orders. Did I put in the orders? Yeah, ship information. So here is our ship information. So the satellite took the required date, ship via, and freight. So we know those 3 things are not going to change from row to row. We know that's not going to change. But it's possible that the shipping information might change. Maybe the ship date and ship required date and ship via might change. I'm just using this as an example, as the link satellite is less likely to change than the actual satellite on the order. And I was able to separate those from the hubs orders versus the link in there. So we got that. We could join these together by those hub hash keys. We can do the same logic we did inside of the product category when we sorted on that version number where we added or we changed an existing row. All that same stuff can be added here. Next thing we need to do is combine it all together with that central order line number. So we're going to finish up talking about some additional items that you might want to know about. We looked a lot at satellites. That hash key plus the date is going to be your primary key. So when you look at a satellite, you're looking at the hash of either the link or the hub plus that load date, or I'm sorry, that start date is going to be your primary key. It's historical tracking, so when one of those pieces of data in the satellite changes, you'll get a new row. Again, it's inserts only. Fully auditable, because you're going to be able to see the state of a link, hub, or whatever data, business data you're looking at any point in time. And again, when you add a new system to replace an existing system, you're going to be using probably a new satellite if you don't have the one-to-one match with column names. But again, you have that source record column in there to help that. You can use views to consolidate the data to make it easier for the business to query those data. Now, as you do sprints, you're going to have containers of sprints 1, 2, and 3. And you're going to need a way to merge these. There's not many relationships that might exist. You might even have links that duplicate. You're going to take the original one from the original sprint, and what you want to do is create this in some sort of master version of your sprints. And it could be an incremental build. So you saw we did the product and categories and then did some things with orders. Eventually we want to merge those 2 together. And there's no modification to the existing sprint table, so you don't need to rebuild anything that was built in a separate sprint. Those additional columns, they're really called hard rules. Those are your start and end date. You don't need to end if your relational database management system can support the lag and lead windows function. If you're putting in a satellite at an older time in the original load of the hub, you want a ghost record to date back to that particular time. Your source data column is, where you could track your separate systems. And you also have in your satellites a hash change column. So what you do is you take all the attributes from that satellite, hash them together, and then in your code, to find out if you need to insert a new record, you compare the hashes from your stage versus what's in the satellite to indicate if you want to insert a new row. There's codes that you don't do lookups. So for instance, we're doing hubs, links, and satellites, and each one of those inserts into a hub, link, or satellite is not dependent on a lookup. You're hashing the key, and the key can be calculated No matter what stage you're at. It could be calculated to hub, link, or satellite. And then you eliminate updates, which will make your ETL so much faster. And of course, because of this, you can create virtual views, kind of materialize it as dimension or fact tables, so you can still have a data mart on top of your data vault. And those are soft rules. Some additional ones is the business vault or information mart. It's a thing called pit and bridge. Pit is point in time. Bridge is the bridge between links and hubs. You really want to start this with views, and your view is really two. One that's particular as of, and then the other one is a current view. You want to see either the current data or a particular point in time. And that's why you see pit sometime is the as of type. And your current is really slowly changing type 1. So your as of can be used for slowly changing type 2, but the current view is whatever it looks like at today's time. So with the pit table, it's a point in time table. It's either for one hub or one link. You have to schedule time to update this table if you're not using a view, and it makes the retrieval faster. So once you see your system start slowing down because of data vault, you'll want to look at producing pit tables. Start with the views first. And it's not for all areas. So some people think, well, let me implement pit everywhere. No. Only implement it once the performance starts to slow down. Same thing for bridge, except it's one or more links. You have to have the hubs that relate the links together. It has the hash keys and the start date from your links. You can include the satellite keys, and really, again, you start with a view, and if you produce a table, you have to schedule the refresh of the data. Some other possibilities is what's called a multi-active satellite. Say you have a list of phone numbers for an employee. It is a satellite. It needs to be unique. If you don't have the uniqueness as a column, you create a sequence number, and then the satellite hash key plus that multi-active satellite key becomes your unique identifier. This is usually like a customer hub or employee that has many phone numbers, and you're putting that within the satellite. There's also a chance where you just use reference and code instead of hub and links. You relate through a foreign key. There's no need for data vault processing. It's like getting a state code with a state name, or internally in the code they did some enumeration. That's EUM. It should be ENUM. And it's some internal coding that has been done by the development team, and you just want to put a descriptive next to it. So thank you again for attending this session. We want to thank Microsoft, who's the main sponsor. There's many other sponsors. I hope you visit them during this DPMMS Summit. Remember about the Data Platform Geeks and the SQL Server Geeks. They're community initiatives that have many people helping everybody in different areas. And I want to thank you. Apparently you could post your selfie with this hashtag pound DPS 2020. You might win some prizes. Please go give some feedback on the conference as well as sessions. And of course, please go visit your sponsors and exhibitors. And you can follow everybody on Twitter at the Data Geeks or at Data AI Summit. Again, thank you for attending the Data Platform Summit 2020. It's virtual around the clock. I hope you enjoy this. Send me questions at the SmilingDBA or the SmilingDBA@gmail.com. Thank you.